Don't get me wrong, I've read and enjoyed Percy Jackson and the Olympians and the Kane Chronicles. I think they're great books and Rick Riordan is a great writer, but he does dominate the modern myth genre, and every genre needs some other authors. So here are a bunch of mythology books for elementary age kids on up that are not Percy Jackson. This is Return to Ithaca by Mary Pope Osborne, another children's literary juggernaut. This is actually just a representation of the series Tales from the Odyssey. There are 6 books in this series, and it retells the Odyssey in a child-friendly way. The Odyssey is referenced and retold and parodied in tons of media, so of course there are kids' books about it, and Mary Pope Osborne is always great. Plus, if they like this one, you could introduce them to The Magic Treehouse. Who doesn't love The Magic Treehouse? The next book is It's All Greek to Me by Joan Scieszka. This is part of the Time Warp Trio series, and while I don't know if I ever read this book, I definitely remember watching the Time Warp Trio show. Basically, in this one, the boys get sucked back into ancient Greece, and not just ancient Greece, mythological ancient Greece. They're on Mount Olympus, in the middle of a feud between the gods. Yikes. Just like with the Tales of the Odyssey, if your kid likes this book, maybe try some other Time Warp Trio books. Also for elementary age readers, I have Heroes in Training, the series by Joan Holub and Suzanne Williams. This follows the Greek gods as about 10-year-old kids having adventures and becoming heroes in training. It's quite a concept. This is also part of a series. It's the series called Goddess Girls, also by Joan Holub and Suzanne Williams. While this is also about the Greek gods, it is entirely separate from Heroes in Training, despite the fact that it's by the same people. This one follows primarily Artemis, Athena, Persephone, and Aphrodite as middle school students at Mount Olympus Academy in ancient Greece. They are still goddesses, they still have abilities, lots of other mythological characters and creatures appear in the books, and they look quite interesting. Your middle schooler might really like it. I actually have a duo next, Love in the Time of Global Warming and The Island of Excess Love, both by Francesca Block. This is the first one, this is the sequel. I don't know if there are any more in the works. I would love for there to be more in the works because I really liked these. These are the first 2 I've actually read of this grouping, and I really liked them. Francesca Block will always have a soft spot in my heart because I've read her books since I was 11 and I've read them at like all the worst times of my life. Love in the Time of Global Warming is set in the not so distant future after an enormous earthquake unleashes monsters and essentially begins the Odyssey. Pen, the main character, is a girl left behind. All her family is gone and she's the only one left. She has to venture out though when she runs out of food in the house. Thus begins her Odyssey. Anyone familiar with the story of the Odyssey will be familiar with the ideas of what happens to her throughout the story, because it is basically a futuristic retelling of the Odyssey where Penelope is the main character, not Odysseus. Then The Island of Excess Love is the continued adventures of Pen and her found family based on the Aeneid. So again, if you're familiar with the original myth, you'll be familiar with the concepts of what's going to happen. There are also some LGBT characters in these books, including a main character who's transgender. It's quite an interesting duo, and I really liked them. But I do recognize that Francesca Block's work is not for everybody, and it takes a particular willingness to suspend disbelief and play with her in that sandbox, because her books are a little odd, even for magical realism. Next, we have The Night Tourist by Katherine Marsh. I read this as a teenager, pretty soon after it came out probably. I think I was only about 16. And just this morning I googled it and found out there's a sequel, so I'll be reading that soon. This is about a boy who's lost his mother 8 years earlier, and he's just had a near-fatal accident, and so his father sends him to see a doctor in New York. While he's there, he meets this girl, Yuri, who takes him into the underworld below New York, below the subway. And it's based on the Greek conception of the underworld. I actually remember reading a part about them going into the underworld below the subway while sitting on a subway platform as a teenager. I think it was the 8th Avenue F train station in Park Slope, but I'm not sure. I really liked this book. So much so that it stuck with me for 10 years, and I was trying to remember its name when I happened upon it at my work in the teen section. Talk about serendipity. For adults, I have Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. This book is about a man, Fat Charlie, whose father dies, and he meets a brother he never knew he had, Spider, and discovers that his dad was a god. Anansi. I really like Neil Gaiman's books, although I haven't read Anansi Boys yet. As you'll know if you watched my 5 books I'm determined to read this year video, that I've been wanting to read this book for 4 years, haven't gotten to it yet, I will this year. Neil Gaiman's writing is always good, and his storylines are always interesting. And I did read the next one I'm going to talk about, American Gods, also by Neil Gaiman. I actually listened to this on audiobook, and I very much recommend doing that because it's a full cast recording. I haven't seen the show yet, so no spoilers. American Gods is about a fight between old gods, especially gods from the old world, and new gods like media and internet. This man's shadow gets hired by Mr. Wednesday. It's Odin. It's Odin. The word Wednesday comes from Odin. Odin's Day, specifically. He gets hired to work for Mr. Wednesday and to help him in this fight against the new gods. It's really good, and actually one of the few books I've read that has intercalary chapters that I didn't mind. I really do recommend the full cast audiobook though. It's amazing. It's like 18 hours long though. So those are the books I have for you. A lot of them are about Greek mythology, which is a little bit my own bias because I love Greek mythology, but also just that I had a hard time finding books about other mythologies or based in other mythologies. So if you know of some, tell me about them in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope you're well. Bye.